Hey guys, tonight we're going to explore something that might sound counterintuitive at first. How inner peace isn't a trophy you earn, but a quiet presence that's always been near. You just forget to listen. The day might have been loud. Your thoughts might still be racing. But beneath it all, there's something in you that doesn't move, doesn't panic, doesn't want. And it's waiting for you now. You will not be able to control the world, but you can control yourself. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is there. I always love seeing how far these moments travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're lying down now or sitting back, and your body is slowly remembering what it feels like to not carry tension. The muscles of your forehead, your jaw, the space behind your eyes. There's no one here to impress, no situation to fix, no narrative to keep alive. For these next few moments, all of that can dissolve like morning mist. And in that quiet, you start to see. You've been chasing peace as if it were a prize at the end of a race. As if the right combination of achievements, timing, praise, and approval would unlock it like a door. But real stillness doesn't arrive after the applause. It slips in when the clapping stops. You've probably had a version of that thought before. Once I finish this deadline, once I move, once they understand me, then I'll rest. But peace doesn't live in outcomes. It lives in presence. Marcus Aurelius, while leading an empire and fighting illness, wrote in his journal late at night, not to document victories, but to remind himself of what truly matters. He wrote to center himself, to ask, what is in my power? What can I let go of? Not because he'd already won peace, but because he knew peace was something you return to over and over, not something you possess once and for all. It's strange, isn't it? How often we tie inner stillness to external milestones. We turn tranquility into a destination. I'll feel okay when. But if you follow that logic, the finish line always moves just a little farther. And in chasing it, you miss the quietness right under your feet. Think about a time in your life when everything was technically fine. No emergencies, no crises, and yet you weren't at peace. Your mind was looping. You were remembering something that hurt, or worrying about something that hadn't happened yet. That's the paradox. Calm isn't about circumstances. It's about where your attention is resting. Philosophers often debate whether inner peace is natural or cultivated. Are we born with it and lose it, or must we train ourselves to find it? The Stoics would say it's both. You have a core that is unshaken, like the depths of the ocean. But to stay connected to it, you must practice, like a musician returning to scales, like a sailor checking the wind. Tonight, that's what you're doing, coming back, not to something new, but to something forgotten. You don't need to conquer yourself. You don't need to win serenity. You only need to stop resisting what's already still. There's a strange truth in this. Some of the most peaceful people you'll meet are not those who have had the easiest lives, but those who stopped trying to edit reality. They let things be what they are. They stopped arguing with the wind and learned how to sail. You can feel that even now, can't you? The way your breath moves in and out. It doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't struggle, and yet it sustains you. That's how inner peace works too. It doesn't shout. It doesn't push. It just is. And when you stop striving for it, it rises to meet you. You remember how often you told yourself, once I finish this, then I'll be okay. It always sounded logical. Once the work calms down, once you save enough, once the conversation is had or the relationship improves. But behind each once, there was always another one waiting. You've lived your life like a traveler chasing the horizon. The faster you move toward it, the more it slips away. And that's the illusion of the finish line, that there is some definable end to your striving, after which life becomes simple, still, resolved. But what if there's no line at all, only the step you are on? The Stoics weren't anti-progress. They simply knew that tying your peace to future outcomes was a clever trap the ego sets for itself. It postpones contentment. It says, you're not there yet. And so, you never arrive. Seneca once warned that people suffer more in their imagination than in reality, not because life isn't hard, but because we multiply our distress by believing peace lies elsewhere. We fantasize about rest instead of allowing it. Think back to a moment where you did reach a goal, a deadline, a promotion, a milestone you'd clung to for months. Maybe you felt relief briefly, but how long did it last? How soon did your mind pivot to the next thing? This is how the mind works. It creates conditions for happiness, then breaks its own rules. And it's not your fault. You've been trained to move toward measurable success. Society loves a story with a climax, achievement, triumph. The movie ends, the music swells, the credits roll, but your life isn't a movie. There's no definitive moment where you get to say, "That's it. I've arrived." Even Marcus Aurelius, who held the most powerful position in the known world, would end his days reflecting not on conquest, but on humility. He'd remind himself that death was always near. That status meant little. That simplicity was enough. He never wrote about a moment of completion. He just kept returning, again and again, to the work of being calm, clear, awake. Maybe you've told yourself you'll slow down after this season, that things are just busy right now. But if every season becomes a bridge to the next, when do you rest on the land itself? Sometimes the finish line isn't just a myth, it's a distraction. You spend your whole life running toward a mirage, when peace was quietly sitting by the road, waiting for you to stop and breathe. There's a subtle form of violence in always reaching. It tells your nervous system that the now isn't enough, that something is missing. But what if you trained yourself to pause, even for a breath, and say, "This moment is whole"? That doesn't mean you give up on effort. It means you stop making peace conditional on effort's reward. There's something radical in doing what you're doing now, lying still, not producing, not proving, just being, listening to the way your thoughts stretch out and soften, letting the silence speak more than your mind has all day. Some philosophers argue that peace isn't even a goal, it's your natural state beneath the noise. Like the sky behind the clouds, like still water under the wind-chopped surface. You don't build peace, you uncover it. Tonight you're beginning to see that, not because you've done something impressive, but because you stopped trying to. And sure, the world will still try to pull you back into the race. It'll whisper that you're falling behind, that you should be doing more, that you're not enough yet, but now you have a choice. You can hear the voice but not obey it. You can acknowledge the thought and still stay right here, in the warmth of this moment, this breath, this pause. There is no trophy for burning out. There is no gold medal for always being busy. But there is a kind of quiet victory in deciding I'm already where I need to be. Remember that, especially tomorrow when the noise returns. You won't have to fight it. Just return to this. The breath, the space, the truth that you never had to win your peace. You just had to stop chasing it. You've waited. Waited for others to understand. Waited for timing to be right. Waited for your turn. But here's a gentle truth. The more you wait for something outside to give you peace, the longer you remain in chains you can't see. Expectation is a quiet kind of prison. It doesn't scream or lock you in with steel bars. It simply hands you a script and says, "Play your part and everything will feel better." But the script was never yours. It's filled with scenes that depend on others behaving the way you want them to. It depends on a world that doesn't owe you anything being exactly how you pictured. You think, if they apologize, I'll forgive. Or, once they see my value, I'll feel secure. But do you see what's happening? You're outsourcing your inner life, giving your calmness to someone else's hands. It's not your fault. Most people were raised on this pattern, to believe that peace comes from order, from alignment, from fairness. But fairness, like calm seas, isn't something you can control. And every time you grip tighter to how you wish things would be, you miss the chance to accept how they are. Epictetus warned, when you desire things not in your control, you will be disturbed. He wasn't being cruel, he was offering a map, a compass that points inward. Think of a time someone let you down. Maybe they didn't keep their word. Maybe they changed, or didn't love you in the way you needed. You waited, hoped. Maybe even tried to make yourself smaller so they could meet you halfway, but the truth is, every second spent expecting someone to become what they cannot be is a second you step further from your own peace. Tonight, lying here in this stillness, you begin to ask something different. What if I release them from the role I've cast them in? It's a radical idea, because the mind clings to expectation. It says, but they should have known, or, but I would never do that to them. And maybe both are true, but fairness isn't always reality's rhythm. And the more you insist that it should be, the more you suffer. Imagine you're holding a rope, tugging with all your strength. On the other side is the version of the world you want. The version where people act with grace, where love is clear, where nothing is ambiguous, but your arms are burning, your hands are raw, and the longer you pull, the more it hurts. The Stoic doesn't win peace by tugging harder. They win it by letting go of the rope. Not giving up, just giving in to reality. That's where the difference lies. Giving in doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care enough about your well-being to stop hurting yourself over something you can't command. There's a strange kind of freedom in that surrender. And yes, it feels like loss at first. You grieve the fantasy. You mourn the version of how things could have been. But then something curious happens. When you stop waiting, you start living again. You begin to see the sunrise not as a backdrop to your pain, but as its own, independent beauty. You hear a laugh from another room and realize not all is broken. You stretch out your body and feel the miracle of being here at all. The paradox is, once you stop expecting, you can finally start appreciating. Some philosophers still debate whether a life without expectation means a life without meaning. If you don't hope, don't wish, don't long, are you not just floating? But the Stoic would say, no, you're finally grounded, not in fantasies but in what is. And from there you can act, not react. Move, not flail, love, not need. You start to sense that even in this quiet room, nothing more needs to happen. There's no missing piece, no promise undone. Just you, the air, the way your chest rises and falls. And the world, it continues untamed, unchanged. But you've shifted. You've loosened the grip. Maybe not all the way, but enough to breathe a little easier. Enough to see that peace isn't found in controlling others or in them doing what you hoped. It's found in the gentle release of waiting. You were never meant to live on pause. You've held on to so many things, ideas of how life should unfold, memories you didn't ask for, words that echoed far too long. It's no wonder your shoulders sometimes feel heavy even when you're doing nothing at all. Not everything is yours to hold. It's a quiet revelation, one that doesn't come in a grand moment of enlightenment, but like a whisper as you lie here in the dark. You realize that some of the burdens you carry aren't even yours. They're echoes of other people's pain, expectations, disappointments. They slipped into your hands without permission, and you, wanting to be good or strong or enough, never questioned it. But tonight you do. You begin to look at each weight in your mind, the grudge you've kept alive, the version of yourself you think you must maintain, the responsibility for everyone else's emotions. And like stones in your pocket, you begin to lay them down, one by one. A Stoic knows the difference between what belongs to them and what doesn't, between what they can influence and what they cannot. That's the principle Epictetus returned to again and again. He said that freedom comes from this simple but difficult distinction. You remember a moment, you were younger then, when someone close to you was angry, maybe even unfair. You tried to fix it, to explain yourself, to absorb their storm like it was your duty. But that storm wasn't yours, and still it soaked you. It's a habit many of us form early, confusing love with taking on what doesn't belong, thinking that if we carry someone else's pain, they'll hurt less, that if we carry the memory, it will finally make sense. But some burdens don't need meaning. They need release. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself often that he could not change the behavior of others, only his response. He didn't write it to sound wise. He wrote it because he was exhausted. Because even emperors feel helpless when those around them act unjustly. And he had to remind himself, again and again, their choices are not mine to fix, and neither are the past's. You start to think about the story you've been carrying, about who wronged you, or who didn't see you, or what you should have done differently. It's a loop that plays, sometimes quietly, sometimes loud. And every time it plays, you think, maybe this time I'll understand it enough to feel peace. But it never works that way. Understanding doesn't always lead to peace. Sometimes it just leads to more analysis, more what-ifs, more holding. So tonight you try something different. You don't try to fix the memory. You don't try to resolve the emotion. You just recognize this is not mine to hold anymore, and you set it down, maybe gently, maybe with a little resistance, but you set it down. There's no ceremony, no applause, just the feeling of space returning to your chest, a lightness in your breath, the beginning of your own return. Some philosophers argue that letting go is an act of faith, not in a higher power necessarily, but in the self, in the idea that you will still be whole without the weight, that you won't float away, that your value is not attached to how much you endure. You don't have to prove you're strong by holding everything. You prove it by knowing what to carry forward. And so you lie there now, not in triumph, but in clarity. The room is the same. The world hasn't changed, but your grip has loosened. You start to trust that the people who love you do not need you to carry everything, that your past does not demand your constant vigilance, that you are allowed, truly allowed, to lay down the invisible load and just be, not perfect, not resolved, just free. Even if only for tonight. Storms come. That's not a warning. That's just the nature of the sky. And just like the weather, life has never promised to be calm on your schedule. It swells, it crashes, it surprises. But you're learning not to fear the storm. The sea doesn't fear the storm, and neither must you. Tonight, in this gentle dark, you remember a moment that once shook you. Maybe it was recent. Maybe it's one of those memories that still carries a pulse when you touch it. Something sudden, a diagnosis, a betrayal, a door that closed before you were ready. You were caught in it like a small boat in a tempest, tossed between confusion and panic. You tried to hold it together. Maybe you pretended to be fine. Maybe you ran, or maybe you fought. All of those are human responses. The Stoics never told you to suppress emotion. They simply urged you not to be consumed by it. Marcus Aurelius wrote his most honest reflections during war, plague, and loss, not in the comfort of peace, but in the midst of chaos. He didn't deny that the storm was real. He simply reminded himself that it didn't have to enter his soul. That's the paradox you begin to feel now, lying in this quiet room. Peace isn't the absence of pain, it's the depth beneath it. Imagine the ocean during a storm. On the surface, the waves crash, the wind howls, the sky breaks open. But go deep enough and the water is still. Cold, dark, untouched. That is your inner life. It can't be seen by the world. It can't be disturbed unless you rise to the surface and meet the storm on its terms. That doesn't mean you ignore your suffering. Quite the opposite. It means you let it pass through you without mistaking it for who you are. You remember a time when something went wrong, deeply wrong. Perhaps someone misunderstood you, or life handed you a situation that made no sense. And in that moment you felt the swell of panic. But then maybe a small voice said, "Wait." Just that, a pause. And in that pause you felt something remarkable. You didn't need to react. The Stoics prized that pause, because between stimulus and response lies your greatest power. It's the space where you choose your perspective. And even when you can't control what happens, you can decide how to meet it. Philosophers sometimes disagree. Can you truly remain calm during devastation? Or is that just emotional repression disguised as wisdom? But the Stoic answer isn't to be cold. It's to feel fully and act wisely. Not from fear, not from rage, but from clarity. Tonight, as you lie still, your body remembers this. You faced storms before. You survived every one. And maybe, just maybe, you learned something deeper from each one. Not just about pain, but about presence. Because the storm always passes. That's the one constant. And the sea never apologizes for rising and falling. It doesn't curse the sky. It doesn't cling to the sun. It knows that change is the rhythm of the world. And so it dances with it. That's your task, too. not to avoid life's storms, but to become the kind of person who remains still beneath them, who doesn't pretend the surface is always calm, but who knows that the depth is always there to return to. You felt that depth before. In the middle of grief, when someone reached out unexpectedly. In the middle of fear, when you found yourself laughing without knowing why. That's the deep water in you, always waiting. So now let yourself feel it. The safety that doesn't rely on control. The calm that doesn't need conditions. The strength that doesn't raise its voice. It's in you already. And no matter what storms come next, because they will, you'll remember this stillness. You'll return to it. You'll become it. There's a moment, a pause right before you respond to something that stings. It's small, barely noticeable. But in that fraction of a second, your entire life can pivot. You don't need to react. That realization arrives not like a rule, but like a quiet door opening inside you. One you didn't know was there. Behind it is space. And in that space is choice. Someone says something unfair, dismissive, maybe even cruel. You feel the heat rise instantly, your heart, your jaw, your fists, even your tongue preparing a sharp reply. But tonight, in the stillness of your body, you begin to ask, what if I don't answer the way I always have? It's not weakness. It's not giving up. It's power. The Stoics called this apatheia, not the numbness the word might suggest today, but the state of being unshaken by external noise. To not let your inner world be dictated by outer turbulence. That doesn't mean you never respond. It means you choose how, when, and whether it's worth the cost. You remember a time when someone's words hooked you. They pulled you into a spiral, defensive thoughts, imaginary comebacks, entire arguments replayed in your mind like a script. You were exhausted by the time it ended, and nothing had really changed. That's what reactivity does. It drags you from the solid ground of presence into a swamp of imagined battles. And even when you win, you're still stuck in the mud. But imagine this instead. Someone provokes you and you do nothing. Not because you're weak. Not because you're afraid. But because you've outgrown the need to prove anything. Because your peace is more precious than being right. There's a kind of elegance in restraint, a quiet strength in choosing stillness over retaliation. It's not glamorous. It's not dramatic, but it's free. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself over and over to meet offense with dignity, not mimicry. If someone is rude, why mirror that rudeness? Why let their chaos become yours? Let them spin. You stay rooted. Of course, this is difficult. Your biology wants to react. Your past wounds want to react. The child in you wants to defend. But the philosopher in you, the deeper part, is learning something else. You can feel it now, can't you? That pull to always respond. And yet, here you are not doing so. The message wasn't replied to. The post wasn't commented on. The insult was left hanging in the air like an unanswered knock. And maybe for the first time, that silence feels like strength. There's a debate among philosophers. If you never react, do you risk being walked on, taken advantage of? But the Stoic response is subtle. No. Because choosing not to react is not the same as surrendering your values. It's protecting your attention. And your attention is the gatekeeper of your life. Reacting is often just rehearsing the same emotional script. Choosing not to react is writing a new one. You begin to feel that possibility now. A space opening up inside you, a breath you didn't know you were holding, and in that breath, freedom. Because the person who doesn't need to clap back to prove a point, to defend every boundary with fury, that person is untouchable. Not because they're invincible, but because they're intentional. You may still feel the urge. That's normal. You're human, but now you recognize it. And once you see it, you're no longer enslaved by it. So tonight, in this still room, you celebrate not the battles you've fought, but the ones you've chosen not to. You honor the moment you said nothing and gained everything. Because peace isn't passive, it's a discipline, and you're practicing it now, breath by breath. There's a story you've told yourself for a long time. Maybe it started years ago. Maybe it was whispered to you in childhood, or shouted by someone who didn't know what they were doing. And somewhere along the way, it became the lens through which you see yourself. But tonight, As you rest here, something inside begins to soften. You start to see. You don't have to keep repeating that story. Letting go of the narrative isn't forgetting. It isn't denial. It's simply realizing that the version you've clung to about who hurt you, who failed you, what went wrong, isn't the only truth. And it certainly isn't the whole truth. You begin to ask, what happens when I stop feeding this story? The Stoics believed that we suffer less from what happens and more from what we say about what happens. Epictetus would often return to this idea. It's not events that disturb us, but our judgment about them. That's not a dismissal of pain. It's a gentle invitation to look at how we narrate our lives, and whether that narration helps us heal or keeps us stuck. You remember how the story goes. They left. They didn't understand. I wasn't enough. I tried so hard and it still wasn't enough. Over time, that narrative becomes automatic. A loop that plays in the background, guiding your choices, clouding your joy. But what if the story isn't wrong, it's just incomplete? You're lying here, and for the first time in a while, you allow that thought. You allow the silence beneath the narrative, the space between sentences. You begin to listen, not to the voice in your head, but to what lives beneath it. You remember Marcus Aurelius, writing not for the world, but to himself. He never intended for his meditations to be published. They were reminders, anchors, ways to reframe his own internal stories. He knew his mind could wander. He knew resentment and fear crept in like fog. So he wrote, not to craft the perfect version of events, but to return to the present. That's what you're doing now. Writing a new line, not with pen and paper, but with breath and awareness. There's a beautiful paradox here. When you stop trying to control the story, it begins to loosen its hold on you. You stop being the victim or the hero. You just become human, complex, evolving, not trapped in a single chapter. Some philosophers wonder, if you let go of your story, do you lose your identity? Who are you without your wounds, your triumphs, your past? But the Stoic answer is this: you are the observer of all of it. You are what remains when the story ends. And in that space, outside the narrative, is peace. Not a loud, triumphant peace. A quiet one. The kind you feel in your bones, not in your mind. The kind that doesn't need to convince anyone. The kind that doesn't need to explain itself. You think back to a time you replayed an argument in your head. How you wished you'd said something different. How you constructed a better version in hindsight. And you realize now, all of that was part of the story, but the moment is gone. The moment doesn't need rewriting. It needs releasing. So you lie here now and gently, maybe even wordlessly, you let the story fade. You don't erase it. You just stop holding it so tightly. You are not what happened to you. You are not what you did. You are not the lines you've repeated to survive. You are what's aware of all of that. You are the space between thoughts, the breath between judgments, the stillness beneath the noise. And in that stillness, something real begins to grow. Not a new story, not a new label, just presence. There's a cup you always reach for, a light you turn off in a particular way, a breath you take before speaking, even if no one notices. These are your rituals. Small, almost invisible. But they are the threads that quietly stitch peace into your everyday life. Small rituals of peace. You've been told that peace requires something big, a vacation, a breakthrough, a life free of stress. But the Stoics would say otherwise. They would point to the quiet acts, the habits that don't look like triumph but hold the same weight. Boiling water for tea, making your bed slowly, washing your face with both hands, not rushing. Those are forms of meditation too. Epictetus insisted that philosophy wasn't meant to be studied in books alone, it was to be lived, practiced, repeated like a form, like muscle memory for the soul. And often the way you practice it isn't through dramatic declarations, but through gentle consistency. You remember a time when everything felt too much. The grief, the uncertainty, the noise, you didn't know what to fix. But you found yourself folding laundry, or sweeping the floor, or lighting a candle. It wasn't about cleaning. It wasn't about productivity. It was about reclaiming a little corner of order in a world that didn't make sense. That's what a ritual is. a small, sacred rebellion against chaos. There's something beautiful about repetition, not the dull, unconscious kind, but the kind that keeps you tethered to yourself. Even when your emotions shift, even when you're lost, you tie your shoes slowly. You check in with your breath. You pour water into a glass and drink it fully, as if it matters, because it does. Some philosophers argue whether rituals are merely distractions from the deeper work of inner transformation. But Stoicism sees it differently. These acts are the work. They are the scaffolding for your inner structure. They ground you quietly again and again. Think of Marcus Aurelius writing in his journal by lamplight. That was his ritual. Each night, no matter what the empire demanded, a return to thoughtfulness, a return to honesty, a ritual of clarity. What's yours? It doesn't have to look impressive. It doesn't have to be photographed or posted or named. Maybe it's stretching in the dark. Maybe it's whispering something to yourself before you sleep. Maybe it's stepping outside barefoot for a second to remember gravity. Tonight, you remember. These tiny acts are not just habits. They are invitations. Invitations back to yourself. And sometimes they are the only thing that hold you steady. There's a moment right now when you adjust your blanket, or soften your face, or listen more closely to the background sound in the room. That's a ritual too, the ritual of noticing, of choosing to be here. You don't need grand discipline to begin. You only need to do one small thing differently, with care, with presence, with the awareness that this moment matters, not because anyone is watching, but because you are watching. The Stoics believed in preparation. That peace isn't what happens in the moment of crisis. It's what you've cultivated in all the small moments leading up to it. Like a soldier polishing his armor each day, not out of paranoia, but out of love for the life he protects. So tonight, think gently about your own armor. Not walls to keep people out, but rituals to keep your spirit in. The world may always be unpredictable, but your rituals can be a quiet rhythm, a melody beneath the noise, a reminder that your life is still yours, even when everything else feels out of tune. You breathe, you exhale, you let the small moment be enough, and in that peace blooms again. Some things don't come back, you know this, not just with your mind, but with your whole body, the way you've had to let go of people, seasons of life, versions of yourself. At some point, something ended, and no matter how hard you tried to rewind it, it stayed gone. And tonight, lying quietly in this space, you face one of the hardest truths. Some things must be allowed to die. The Stoics were not afraid to speak of death, not just the final one, but the many little deaths that happen throughout a lifetime. The end of a friendship, the loss of an identity, the falling away of a dream you once carried like a light in your chest. To accept these deaths is not coldness. It's a profound act of love. It's looking honestly at life and saying, I won't cling to what's already gone. I'll honor it by letting it rest. You remember a time you tried to hold on too tightly, to keep something alive through sheer will. Maybe it was a relationship that had run its course, or a job that drained your soul, or a belief about yourself that no longer felt true. You kept it breathing long after it had stopped giving life back, and in doing so, you slowly suffocated your own peace. Marcus Aurelius wrote again and again about nature's rhythm, how things rise, crest, and fall. He reminded himself that he too was part of that rhythm, not above it, not immune. And so, he trained his heart to accept endings as part of the cycle. Tonight, you're beginning to feel that shift, not just intellectually, but somatically. The way your chest loosens when you stop resisting what already slipped away. The way your breath deepens when you stop trying to edit the past. Grief, of course, doesn't leave just because you understand it. You still ache. You still remember. But you begin to understand that grief itself isn't the problem. It's the struggle against grief that hardens you. Letting something die is not the same as forgetting it. It's the opposite. It's making space for its memory to exist without needing to control it. To hold it lightly, like a photograph you no longer need to carry everywhere you go. Some philosophers debate whether complete detachment is healthy. Isn't it human to hold on, to fight for what matters? And yes, it is. But the Stoic path doesn't ask you to feel less. It asks you to cling less, to recognize that clinging is not the same as caring. You can love something deeply and still let it go when its time has passed. That's what you're doing now. Not rushing the process, not demanding closure, just being here in this still moment with the truth that something has ended and that you're still whole. You imagine placing that thing gently down, a version of you that no longer fits, a hope that quietly expired, a relationship that now only lives in memory. You place it not in a grave but in a garden, and you let it return to the soil. What grows from that space may surprise you. It might not look like what you lost, but it will come. Not because you chased it, but because you cleared the space for it to arrive. And now, with a quieter heart, you breathe in the fullness of this moment. You realize you've survived many endings, and each time something new was born, not immediately, not always clearly, but eventually. There is a peace that can only come from surrender, from knowing you no longer need to carry what was, from accepting that the death of one thing is often the beginning of something deeper in you. You rest, not because the sadness is gone, but because you're no longer afraid of it. You've been told to be strong, to hold it together, to keep going no matter what. And maybe you've done that. Maybe you've carried yourself through pain, through silence, through uncertainty, with clenched teeth and quiet pride. But strength isn't always what you've been told. Tonight, you begin to explore a different kind of strength, the kind that doesn't resist emotion, but welcomes it like a guest, the kind that allows the wave to pass through instead of trying to stop the tide. The Stoics were often misunderstood as being cold or emotionless, but their wisdom doesn't ask you to be a statue. It asks you to be steady. It invites you to be like a mountain, not unmoved because you feel nothing, but because you've built something deep enough inside that can hold the storm without collapsing. Think back to a moment when you felt overwhelmed, when the tears were close or maybe they came and you scolded yourself. I shouldn't feel this way. But who told you that? Where did you learn that emotion makes you weak? The Stoics never said that. Epictetus acknowledged that grief is natural, that pain arises. What he warned against was becoming enslaved by it, becoming defined by the very feelings that should be passing through. There's a paradox here. When you resist emotion, it grows louder. But when you meet it gently, without judgment, it often dissolves sooner than you expect. That doesn't mean you rush it. It means you allow it to come and go, like weather through the sky. Tonight, in the dark comfort of where you rest, you feel the safety to admit you're tired of pretending to be fine. You're tired of hiding every feeling behind a mask of composure. And slowly, maybe even for the first time in a long time, you give yourself permission to feel without shame. It's strange, isn't it? How we often comfort others, telling them it's okay to cry, okay to feel, but deny ourselves that same tenderness. You've been kind to others. Now you begin to be kind to yourself. Marcus Aurelius would write reminders not to suppress pain, but to meet it with honesty. He didn't pretend he was always at peace. He questioned himself, doubted himself, forgave himself. That's not weakness, that's maturity. And you tonight, you're practicing that same maturity, not with grand gestures, just by saying inwardly, I don't need to be unbreakable. I just need to be present. Some philosophers argue, if you give emotion too much space, will it take over? Will it make you soft or less rational? But the Stoic response is more nuanced. Feel deeply, but do not drown. Acknowledge the wave, but return to the shore. You're not broken for feeling. You're not failing because you still hurt. You're simply human. And the deeper your emotions, the deeper your capacity for understanding, for compassion, for wisdom. So let yourself be soft here. Let the armor crack. Let the breath quiver if it needs to. There's no audience, no scorecard, just you and the quiet truth that softness can be strength. Think of the tree that bends in the wind. It survives not by resisting but by yielding, by allowing movement instead of splitting under pressure. You are that tree, rooted, flexible, alive. And now, as the emotion settles or doesn't, you begin to trust that you can hold it. You don't have to run from it. You don't have to fix it tonight. You just have to meet it with open eyes and say, "You're allowed to be here, and you will pass." That's real strength. You want to be understood. It's one of the quiet longings that hides beneath your thoughts, isn't it? Not just to be seen, but to be truly seen. To have someone say, "I get it. I get you. But here's the hard truth. Not everyone will understand you, and that's okay." It's one of the deepest aches to share a truth, a part of yourself, and have it land in silence. Or worse, to feel dismissed, misinterpreted, minimized. You carry that silence like a bruise. Maybe you stop sharing so openly. Maybe you learn to package your thoughts into something more acceptable. And yet, the Stoics knew this feeling well. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily, "You can live well even if others don't understand you." He didn't write it to sound wise. He wrote it because he needed to hear it, because even an emperor could feel alone in a crowded room. Tonight, in this dim silence, you start to breathe into that idea, that your peace does not depend on someone else's ability to comprehend your heart. Yes, connection is beautiful. Yes, being heard can heal. But chasing constant understanding, that's a recipe for disappointment. Because most people aren't seeing you, they're seeing their version of you, filtered through their stories, their fears, their expectations. That isn't your fault. You remember a time you shared something vulnerable, maybe a decision you made or a shift in who you were becoming, and someone pushed back. They questioned it, mocked it, or just looked confused. You felt that sting of distance. You wanted to explain, to fix the gap, but the gap stayed, and maybe it always will. But what if that doesn't have to be a tragedy? The Stoics believe that what matters most is how you live, not how others interpret your life. That your integrity, your peace, your self-awareness, these are your companions, not applause, not approval, not even understanding. Some philosophers argue that humans are wired for connection, and they're right. But connection doesn't mean constant comprehension. Sometimes, the deepest bond isn't someone finishing your sentence, it's someone respecting your silence. And if you haven't found that yet, you can still be whole. Tonight, you rest in the company of your own truth. You give yourself what others haven't always been able to, the gift of being with what's real without needing it to be justified. There's a strange freedom in no longer needing to explain yourself. You stop performing. You stop shrinking. You simply exist as you are without apology. This doesn't mean you isolate. It means you begin to understand that you are your first witness, your first friend, your first refuge. And when that relationship becomes stable, others can misunderstand you without shaking your center. You might still feel that ache sometimes, that desire to be mirrored perfectly. But you'll also notice this. The less you depend on being understood, the more you attract those who see you without explanation. You don't need to twist yourself into shapes to fit someone's view. You don't need to soften your truth just to avoid friction. You can let others be confused. Let them think what they want. You don't control their story about you, and you don't have to. Marcus didn't. Epictetus didn't. Neither will you. So tonight, lie back into this awareness that you are allowed to be complex. You are allowed to grow in ways that others won't understand. You are allowed to be a mystery and still feel peaceful. You are not alone. You are simply whole. There's a kind of quiet freedom in realizing you don't need as much as you think you do. That idea doesn't come with fireworks. It arrives slowly like a breeze through an open window, unannounced, unexpected, but deeply familiar, like something you always knew but forgot. So much of modern life is built on wanting more comfort, more answers, more certainty. But the Stoics saw things differently. They believed the path to peace wasn't about accumulation, it was about subtraction. You begin to feel that now in the dark stillness of this room, that maybe you've been carrying too many needs, not all of them real. Some handed to you by advertising, some by fear, some by the voices of people who told you who you should be before you even had the chance to ask who you truly are. Epictetus said that freedom begins the moment you stop wishing for things to be different, not because you give up, but because you stop needing the world to bend to your preferences. You remember a time you thought something would change everything, A relationship, a promotion, a decision someone else would make in your favor. You told yourself, once this happens, then I'll be okay. But even when it happened or didn't, you were still left with yourself. That's the pattern, isn't it? The mind believes in milestones. It treats peace like a reward. Once I get there, I'll feel calm. But there is no there, just this moment, this breath, this unfolding. It's humbling and liberating, because it means you already have what you need to begin. You think about Marcus Aurelius, surrounded by wealth, status, and power. And yet, he often reminded himself to live simply, to walk lightly. He slept on a basic bed, ate plain food. He knew that luxury doesn't guarantee tranquility, and that peace, if it ever arrives, must come from within. Some philosophers debate this. Should we renounce all desire? Isn't that extreme? But the Stoics weren't ascetics. They didn't demand that you abandon the world. They simply asked you to examine what truly matters, to distinguish between what is nice to have and what is necessary. And often, what's necessary is shockingly simple. You may not need the perfect plan, or the perfect answer, or even the closure you've been waiting for. You might only need a little stillness, a small breath of honesty, a willingness to say, this is enough for now. That's not settling. That's clarity. The noise of wanting will always be there. It tells you you're behind, that something's missing, that everyone else has it figured out. But the Stoic way is quieter. It asks you to sit still while the world rushes by and notice what doesn't move. That part of you is always there. The observer, the awareness, the simple fact of being alive even when life is messy. That's your foundation. So tonight, you strip it back. You imagine letting go of everything you thought you needed to feel whole. Every condition, every expectation. You picture yourself empty-handed and notice that your breath still flows. Your heart still beats. Nothing essential is gone. That's peace. The kind that can't be taken away because it's not based on possession. It's based on presence. You may still want things. That's okay. You're human. But you're no longer enslaved by those wants. You see them as guests, not rulers. You welcome them kindly and let them leave when it's time. You close your eyes now and something inside you softens. You are enough, not because you've completed anything, but because you've remembered something. You don't need more, you need less. Less noise, less judgment, less needing life to be different before you can exhale. And tonight, you exhale fully, finally. There's a silence you've been avoiding, not the silence of a quiet room, but the deeper one. The silence that shows up when there's nothing left to distract you, when the phone is off, the list is done, the mask is resting quietly on the shelf. That silence is where you meet yourself. It's not always comfortable at first. In fact, it can be jarring. Without the noise, your thoughts echo louder. Memories rise that you thought were buried. You start to feel things you didn't schedule. And maybe, for a moment, you wonder if you've made a mistake, if all this stillness is just an invitation for anxiety to sneak in. But the Stoics would tell you, this is the beginning of wisdom. They didn't fear silence. They sought it, not as an escape, but as a return. Marcus Aurelius often slipped into solitude amidst the constant demands of empire. Seneca wrote that stillness was where one could see things clearly, free from the distortions of external opinion. And you, tonight, are beginning to do the same. You lie still, and instead of reaching for something to fill the space, you remain. You listen, you wait, and slowly you begin to notice what lives in that silence. Not just fear, not just overthinking, but also clarity. The mind, when left undisturbed, begins to reveal its deeper truths. Like muddy water settling, the sediment drifts down and the surface clears. Thoughts lose their sharpness. Emotions become less urgent. You begin to hear the part of you that doesn't shout. That's the voice you've forgotten. It doesn't argue. It doesn't demand. It observes. It reminds you that much of what you stress about is imagined, that the fears you carry are often echoes from the past, not warnings from the future. Some philosophers debate whether silence is even possible in a noisy world. But the Stoics remind us, silence isn't the absence of sound, it's the absence of attachment to it. You can find stillness in a crowded train, a busy day, or even inside your own racing mind, if you know how to return to it. And returning doesn't mean you force your thoughts to stop. That's not peace, that's control. What you do instead is allow. Let the thoughts rise and fall. Let them swirl, then fade. You don't wrestle them, you witness them. That witnessing is the heart of Stoic practice. The ability to step outside of yourself, not in dissociation but in clarity. To watch the emotion without becoming it. To notice the thought without needing to answer it. You begin to feel that now, don't you? That gentle distance. Not a wall, but a cushion. Between you and your fear, between you and your expectation. There's space now, breathable, quiet. And in that space you remember something: peace doesn't need to be earned. It's your natural state beneath the clutter. You don't need to fix everything tonight. You don't need to make every thought go away. You simply need to remember that silence is not emptiness, it's fullness without noise. You're not broken for craving quiet. You're not lazy for stepping away. You're simply returning to yourself, the version of you that isn't defined by reaction, the version of you that can sit in a room alone and feel whole. The world may continue to shout. It may try to rush you. It may push more and more into your hands. But tonight, you choose to hold nothing. You choose to just listen. And what you hear finally is your own heartbeat, your own breath, the subtle rhythm of being alive. That's enough. You've made mistakes. Some small. Some so heavy they still echo in your memory like footsteps in an empty hallway. And maybe, late at night, they return, not with cruelty but with weight. A quiet reminder of what you wish you had done differently. But tonight, you begin to learn the art of forgiving yourself. This isn't about pretending it didn't happen, or rewriting the story so you look better. The Stoics never asked you to forget your flaws. In fact, they urged the opposite. Marcus Aurelius began each day by reminding himself of his imperfections, so that he could meet them honestly without shame. Because awareness is not punishment. It's the beginning of transformation. You remember one mistake in particular. Maybe you spoke in anger, or stayed silent when someone needed you. Maybe you chose comfort over courage, or made a decision that rippled through more lives than just your own. And for a long time you carried it like a burden. You thought, if I just feel bad enough, maybe I'll make up for it. But guilt doesn't undo the past. It doesn't cleanse it. It only keeps you chained to a version of yourself that no longer exists. Epictetus would have said, you did what you knew. With the clarity, strength, and awareness you had at the time. Would you do it again now? Likely not. And that difference, that growth, is enough. Some philosophers question, if we forgive ourselves too easily, do we lose accountability? Do we risk justifying anything? But Stoicism answers this with precision. True self-forgiveness isn't about excusing harm. It's about integrating it, looking at your past not as a stain but as a teacher, and then walking forward with the intention not to repeat, but to rebuild. Tonight, you sit gently with that younger version of yourself, the one who didn't know better, or maybe the one who did but was too scared to act on it. You see them now. You don't rush to defend them. You don't rush to condemn them. You just sit beside them. That's the beginning of peace, because healing doesn't always come from fixing something. Sometimes it comes from staying close to it, long enough to stop being afraid of it. And once you're no longer afraid, something beautiful happens. You begin to trust yourself again. Forgiveness is not forgetting. It's remembering with softness. It's telling the truth without cruelty. It's accepting that you are not frozen in time, that you are fluid, moving, capable of growth. You're not just the mistake. You're the hand that trembled after it, the breath that came hours later, the insight that formed in the dark, the apology you whispered, even if no one heard it. You are still becoming. Marcus once wrote that even the greatest of men made missteps, but what made them great was that they turned inward, recalibrated, and continued walking. Quietly, without fanfare, just forward. You're doing the same. So tonight, as you lie still, you place one hand on your chest and say inwardly, I forgive you. Not because it was okay, but because you refuse to be trapped in a version of yourself that no longer reflects your heart. You may need to say it again tomorrow, or again next week. That's okay. Forgiveness is not a single event, it's a practice, a muscle, a returning. And with each return, you peel back another layer of self-judgment. And what you find underneath is someone worth loving, someone who's trying, someone who is still here, still learning, still walking, still worthy. There's something you've longed for all your life. Not loudly, not always consciously, but steadily like a gentle pull beneath everything you do. It's not success, or recognition, or even happiness exactly, it's freedom. Not the kind they advertise, not the freedom to buy or to travel or to escape, but something quieter, the freedom to be at peace with yourself, no matter what's happening outside you. That's the inner freedom the Stoics spent their lives practicing. A freedom not earned through conquest but through surrender, not to others, but to what is. And tonight, in this calm stillness, you begin to sense what that might feel like. You're not chasing it, you're not forcing it, you're simply allowing it to rise. Freedom from needing to always be right. Freedom from replaying conversations in your head. Freedom from the endless self-editing, the second-guessing, the need to prove your worth. You feel it in your body now, subtle but unmistakable. A soft release in your chest. A tiny breath where tension used to live. That's what happens when you stop resisting yourself. The Stoics didn't define freedom as doing whatever you want. They defined it as wanting only what you can control. And what can you control? Your perspective, your effort, your response, that's it. And somehow that's enough. You think of Epictetus, born into slavery. By every external measure, he had no freedom at all. Yet his mind was unshaken, his dignity intact, because he knew that no one, not even an emperor, could take away his ability to choose how to meet each moment. You begin to understand, freedom doesn't mean life is easy. It means life no longer owns you. There will still be sadness, still be loss, still be discomfort, but you are no longer defined by them. You hold them gently. You let them pass through, like clouds across a vast, untroubled sky. Some philosophers debate whether true inner freedom is even possible, whether it's just an ideal we chase but never reach. But maybe the Stoics weren't promising perfection. Maybe they were simply offering direction, a path, one you can walk slowly, one that begins wherever you are. And right now, you are already on it. You feel that now in your breath. You're no longer chasing peace. You're embodying it, not perfectly, but faithfully, moment to moment. You don't need anyone's permission to be free, not from the past, not from fear, not from the imagined expectations you've lived under for too long. And now you rest, not because the world has changed, but because you have, because the war inside you is quieter, because the silence no longer scares you, because peace is no longer something you win, it's something you remember. And in these final few minutes, as your breath slows, we wind down together. There is no grand ending, no final revelation, just this: your life is happening now. In this breath, in this body, in this very moment. No need to fix, no need to rush. The night holds you gently. The thoughts drift like leaves in a current and you don't chase them. You just notice them and let them go. You are safe. You are enough. And even as the world keeps turning outside, something inside you has finally settled. Let it stay. Let yourself soften. Let the quiet carry you.